Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z Martin, and tonight we are talking about how Sam and Dean live on the margins, what that means, and what it means to be outside societal norms, as the show often told us hunters were. What's that really like, and what effect would that have had on Sam and Dean? So I won't say if they're real, because we're fans, they're real to us. But what's the impact of that kind of marginality? And first, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Susan.
Well, I'm Susan Nylander, and I teach English at Barstow College. I also write about Sam and Dean, and I write about other scholarly, academic, fan-ademic kind of where they all meet together. The Death and Supernatural Critical Essays book that's just over my shoulder with my writing partner Mandy Taylor, and I put that out. We've got a Women in Supernatural that is just about ready to go to peer review, which is very exciting. And that should be out later in the year, Women in Supernatural Critical Essays. So as always, excited to be here.
Awesome. Travis?
Hi, my name is Travis Adams. I'm a social worker, and I work at the San Diego VA Vet Center. I specialize in working with service members and veterans who have had issues from their time in service, put in combat zones often. So, hunting and killing things or seeking things out, similar to what the boys do. So, very similar to Susan, the fanademic. I really like that term. I use a lot of pop culture to help with connecting with my clients and understanding emotions and situations, and the combining of the two really helps out.
Okay. And I'm Gail Z Martin, and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic and urban fantasy. As Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male paranormal romance. But all my modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I'm also, if you couldn't tell, an obsessed Supernatural fan, so I love talking about it any chance I get. So throughout the series, the boys and Bobby and some of their other friends make mention of the fact that hunters live by a different code. They're outside the law. Normal people don't understand that they have to stay separate, and we see that in they get by with credit card fraud and winning by poker, and they sleep in their car. They're really not mainstream, even aside from digging up graves and torching bodies. We certainly have some real life situations where different groups live kind of on the edges of conventionality and sometimes legality. And so what's the impact on the folks who are outside the norm for conventional society? What are the benefits? What are the pros? What are the cons? What's that mean for someone? And especially like Sam and Dean growing up with that. Susan?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll talk a little bit about what I talked about this very thing in my Death and Supernatural chapter. I quoted Robert McDermott, who wrote about the individual, the rugged individual, and that mythos that we have in the United States. He wrote that, quote, in contemporary American culture, individualism is associated with anti-community values, with the conventional male ideal of the solitary hero. The popular idea of individualism, like the prevalent idea of freedom, is tied to wanting one's own way, one's own space, one's own style, one's own income and security, one's own control of family and relationships. There is a strong tradition that espouses an individualism of context and relation. And I kind of followed up with the idea that John kind of passes on his anti-community values to Sam and Dean. He keeps them on the margins. as hunters. They don't mix a lot with mainstream. You know, Sam's constantly as a child trying to fit in to normal school friends or normal activities, playing soccer, those kinds of things. He's trying so hard to do that, but John keeps them moving all the time. So they're constantly on the margins. And the thing about Sam and Dean in particular, they are not just on the margins of conventional society, they actually live on the margins of hunter society as well. John told them, don't go to hunter gatherings, right? Bad things happen at hunter gatherings. So they really actually you know, they have a few, obviously, hunter friends like Bobby and the people that they trust. But for the most part, you know, they're really wary of other hunters, of other hunter communities. So they've kind of built their own community that's rather insular. But again, it's on the margins of the margins. And I think that we see that and how Sam and Dean deal with that. And I think part of that is why they're so insular with one another. So, you know, that they're rugged individuals, but they work together in that sense that they keep other people and other communities sort of at bay. And I think that's part of when you talk about what's the pros and the cons, you know, I think we see a lot of those with that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, how Sam and Dean move through the world. They are very, very insular in themselves and away from the greater community and the hunter community as well.
Okay. Travis, it reminded me a little bit of some of the stories I've heard my friends who were military brats talk about growing up, where if they had siblings, it was just them and their siblings because they were moving all the time. They never really got to spend time with people, and they didn't really get to hang out with people outside of the military, you know, lifestyle. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I was actually kind of thinking about that while Susan was talking specifically with John, being in the Marine Corps and thinking about like a subgroup of a subgroup, right? The Marine Corps, especially if you look at the grand scheme of the military, right? Having so many people, the Army being so large, usually about 3 times the size of the Marine Corps, the Marine Corps being the smallest of all the branches. So they already think that service veterans can only understand me, and then Marines can only understand me. So he already kind of felt that way. But then I look back on the times when Dean goes back in time, and everybody knows who he is. He's very friendly, he's very popular, and he struggles maintaining jobs. Is it because he can't relate? We don't get to expand on that much from the show, but I do think that that can absolutely play a role on how people understand us and feeling connected to others. John has his history in the Marine Corps, and how does that play a role in who he talks to, how he handles situations? And then you get brought into this like very specific group of what hunting is, because of the loss with Mary and what that feels like and how that impacts them. And it becomes like information based decision making, right? So they're before Mary happens, so like, John doesn't know too much about hunting and what that looks like. Mary does, but she keeps it a secret, and that's a separate part of life. But for John, he doesn't know these things exist, so he doesn't worry about those things. And then when he learns they exist, he can't turn it off, and he needs to hunt them. He needs to protect people, and I feel like that helped him reconnect to that Marine Corps aspect of who he is. And then he passes that on to the boys. One of the things in the Marine Corps is small unit leadership. I served in the Marine Corps for 10 years, and it's all about you and 3 other guys, a 4-man fire team, and being able to handle the things you handle. And then, from there you can expand. And I think we do see that occasionally when we have other hunters, when shit really hits the fan, they call in the other hunters, busting into the men and letters bunker, having certain types of funerals or memorial services for people and being able to kind of connect that way. Um, yeah, I think there's just so much that we can dissect when looking with the military aspect, the hunter aspect, and then that in-group out-group dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you know, sometimes sometimes we got things like the Roadhouse, which didn't get to last for long, but that was more plot driven than anything else. Where we think of well, veterans have the VFW, veterans have groups that they can go hang out with other people who have lived the life and will understand them. But with hunters, there was still, at least for Sam and Dean, if not other hunters, there was still a lot of paranoia, whether that was because John was afraid hunters would find out about Sam and the demon blood and come after them, or because John was just a paranoid SOB and didn't like anybody around. We're never quite sure of that. What does that, how does that factor in when there isn't that third space to go to? And you're really, they had a 3-man group at best, sometimes 4 with Bobby after, well, 3 again with Bobby once their dad was gone. How does that affect you when there isn't that other place to go with people who can speak your language? Susan?
Well, I think that's a really good point. And I think that leads to part of the codependency that Sam and Dean have with one another, because often they are the only ones who understand. I noticed this on a much less serious, life-threatening thing, but I noticed, my brothers and I are the last, our parents are gone. We lost our sister. And I went to visit my brother, who was also a Marine, by the way. He was in Vietnam. And got to talking with him. And he had all of these great things to share because I'm the baby. So he had a lot of things to tell me about that happened before I came around. But then we also were able to share these great memories of our folks that no one else really will understand. And no one else can really get some of those little funny things or those little jokes like the 3 of us, my brothers and I, we can get it immediately. But outside of that, there's that group is dwindling now to the people who can actually relate to that or understand some of those things. And so I think that that's part of what Sam and Dean go through, where they only can relate to one another. When they lose their dad, they lose touch with one more person who knew them as children, knew them growing up. And then, Bobby does. He has some memories of that, but they weren't with Bobby 24/7. So to lose the connections like that, I think that's what really turns Sam and Dean more insular, and not having that outside connection with other hunters. Whether that was a wise thing of John to tell them, stay away, they're trouble, but or not, we find that they just didn't do that. They didn't connect with many other hunters. They were very, very secure. So, John got his mission, yes, and took it, full steam ahead. But I think passing that mission on to the boys, and he admits he became their drill sergeant. Speaking of the military, they were raised as warriors, as Sam says. So having that warrior mentality, and again, they're always constantly trying to protect others, not just physically, but also from the secret of what's out there, to allow people to sleep in their beds safely at night. And so that's, again, I think there's a lot that we can connect militarily with that. That's our service members, they're out there fighting so that we can sleep well at night and be safe in our homes. And so that's what Sam and Dean were doing, albeit with monsters. So so yeah, I'm really curious to see what Travis has to say about this for the idea of that third space, of that third that connection. I know my brother was able to deal with things a lot better when he connected with the guys in Fubai. They had the reunion of guys who had been in Fubai, and he was in Wei and a couple of other really bad hotspots. And so I think that makes a difference in how you reconcile a lot of the wartime memories. So, you know, Travis knows this probably a lot better than I do. So I'm really curious to see what you have to say.
Yeah, there's a little bit there. And I think you're touching right on it. You know, whether it's military or hunters, that becomes their identity, and that is everything that encompasses them. And Sam has growth before we even get to see them on screen. Right? He left to go to school. He wanted something more. He's always kind of wanted this. And then we get those flashbacks and things as a kid. Um, and Dean, like he wants to be a hunter, and that is his sole identity. And he knows that it will end bloody, and it doesn't matter. And he keeps going. And it's the same for the military. It's like if I'm not a Marine, Airman, Seaman, soldier, sailor, whatever, then what am I? And I think that that's what really struggles for them, and being able to have a third space because they feel like they don't have anything else outside of them. You know, like you get to hear them a lot talking about growing up and doing the hustling at pool halls and stuff, especially in season 15 when they lose their luck. You know, and going back to their roots, because it's their identity. But you also get to see in season 14 when Sam becomes chief and he's teaching the people from apocalyptic world, like, hey, these are how we do things. And he builds up a family, he builds up a structure, a system. So while the boys were encouraged as kids to not attend other hunters, he trains all these hunters and starts to kind of send them out. You know, we see this with Bobby early in the season. When he dies, Garth picks up that hat, literally, and goes on with it. And then we get to see Sam do that later. You know, so I think that all these things are really good, and Sam follows and finds another identity. Dean tries. You know, we see that when Sam goes to hell in season 5, and then Dean in season 6, where we pick up with Ben and Lisa. Excuse me. He tries, but it's just not him because that's not his identity. And he doesn't want to let go of it. And that, to me, that's what it always comes down to.
Absolutely. I think you also see him holding on to a lot of those things where, you know, he's got the devil's trap at the door, he's got the salt gun and the holy water under the bed, you know. So I mean, he hasn't let go of that, even if he's not actively hunting. And then going in and working in construction or something that's physical for him. You know, I mean, he's not going to be a Walmart greeter. You know,
Yeah.
he's not going to be they're not going to work at McDonald's. They're not those kinds of jobs. So yeah, it's easier to hustle pool or to you know, get in a couple of poker games and try and earn some money that way. But I think you have a point as far as like, even if they're trying to stick their big toe into the greater mainstream normal community, even then they're not fully there. They're really not fully there. So
Yeah, and I loved when they had Dean kind of doing more physical work, because that's what I find with a lot of my Vietnam veterans, especially now that they're retiring and they can't avoid through physical manual labor, those thoughts creep up. So if I'm exhausted physically, I'm gonna increase my probability of sleeping at night. That with, you know, drugging, drinking, whatever you choose, which is what we see Dean do the whole series. All that stuff to kind of keep those thoughts back.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's exactly. Yeah, and I thought they did a great job in kind of mirroring what happens in the military because that's the same type of behaviors and the same type of approaches I see.
You know, I think I had to chuckle when you brought up cowboys, Susan, because you know, we have this largely Hollywood driven idea of the lone hero and his horse. And that there were all these loners out there on the Great Prairie. And I remember taking a history class that was specifically about the American West and discovering the cowboy period in the open range only lasted 15 years in real life, and 150 in Hollywood, but 15 on the range. And B, that San Francisco in its founding years had more ice cream parlors than saloons, that people took their community with them and reestablished it. It wasn't just single men on their horse, fighting for justice. People loaded up their wagon with the whole family, and they built a town and they built a community, and that need for community went with them. And that seems to largely be missing from what we see of the hunter world in Supernatural. There are biker bars. There are, in real life, there are special places for people who don't fit necessarily in the mainstream, but not so much that were shown in Supernatural. How does that impact not only the relationships, but the psychology of trying to survive in such a high pressure world? Susan?
Well, I think that, again, having spaces where they feel comfortable, and we don't see them often. Yes, we don't see them hanging out at ice cream parlors. Speaking of that, we see them going to the bars. We see them. That's why they get so good at darts. That's why they get so good at all of the, at pool and these different games that they can play, and maybe hustle. But they're with a crowd of people that seem to accept them. And so that's where they go to either blow off steam or, look for new jobs. Often you see Sam with his laptop in a public space rather than just in a motel by himself or waiting for Dean to come back, or, however that works, to have that be out in public, but they're still in a space that makes them feel welcomed, than, more welcomed than, say, I just don't see Sam setting up a laptop in Applebee's. I mean, the diners, yeah, maybe somewhat, but not to the degree that, they're not hanging out at the mall. So
Diners have truckers, and long haul truckers have their own kind of culture and community.
My dad was a truck driver, and so yes, very comfortable around truck stops. And so sometimes we would, if we were traveling, we would stop at a truck stop because he knew his way around the place, so I think that we take that with us into other spaces that we feel comfortable in.
Okay, Travis?
Yeah, I think that like we find these the fringes of the in group, right? So we have these societal roles where kind of like what the normal person would do. We hear normal often, and it's what the average person would do in any given situation. What would the majority of people do? And then that creates like an in group and an out group. So, or like, this is what normal people would do, and this is what weirdos would do, right? And the in group becomes very judgmental of the out group, but the out group also is perceived to be like, it's either you're one or the other. There is no third option, fourth option, 10th option. When in actuality, there's so many, right? And you just hit it, right? Looking at hunters versus truckers. And I think that what's really cool about the show is that they walk that in-group line by giving them law enforcement, but like FBI, right? Fish and game. They're not just regular cops. They're showing up and they're special people, so that way they can kind of walk or skirt that line of that accepted group. Like, hey, we're hunting this thing, or we're here to help you with this. But meanwhile, they're outside of it. But it's a way to kind of like walk that line, which I really like. And we see that a lot. And we do see, you mentioned like Applebee's, and I was reminded of when Cass is running from the Angels. So he just keeps going to the different types of restaurants because they all look the same. And it was hard to narrow him down where he was. And I love that. But yeah, you don't see Sam hanging out at Starbucks.
Right.
You see them in those are the places where people kind of keep to themselves. They mind their own business. You see how many times they put their head down. When we see an ice cream parlor, that means somebody's about to die because they're going to smite everybody.
Right.
We're going to have some angel carved in his chest, or we're going to have Lilith walk in, or something bad is going to happen in a happy ice cream place. So the boys aren't there.
Sad but true. Now, even outsider groups have their own societal norms. And I'm thinking here about, bikers. Bikers have their own kind of code and their own expectations of one another. One of the things that fascinated me is there is a town in Florida that was especially created so carnival workers had a place to retire with other carnies, other people who understood the life on the road. And that's another group that is perceived to be on the outside of societal norms, playing by some different rules. What goes into this need for in-group rules, and how did it work for and against the boys, Susan?
That made me think of that when Travis brought up the in-group and out-group. Do we remember when at the Roadhouse when Ellen and Joe are having the argument, and then all of a sudden this family wearing Nebraska is for lovers shirts, and they're all dressed the same, and they probably have the minivan out front, and they're just this normal middle-class suburban family out on a road trip, and that's the last place, then they decide, well, we'll just go to the Arby's down the road. And so they recognized, I think, that they were not in the right space. They were not in a place that was going to be too comforting or welcoming, the big fight going on, notwithstanding. But I think they kind of got that, we need to go to a more mainstream place because this is a place for not us, and I think that with the boys, again, they make their space where they find themselves, but I'm thinking about too, when say they first meet Gordon, and Dean is so hungry for someone who is a little bit older, who has this experience, who is a great hunter. And I think he's looking for approval from Gordon. And when they're in this bar, toasting the fact that they just, lopped off a vamp's head, and Sam's not enjoying that. I think that really shows us really early on what the boys were all about. Dean was really comfortable. Well, when they go to prison, right? They go to in Folsom Prison Blues, right? Sam is like, does it bother you that you fit in so well here? And Dean's like, no. So I think that Dean fits in a lot of places that most mainstream people would be a little horrified to find themselves in. But Dean makes the best of a lot of situations. But put him in with a regular apple pie life, and he has a hard time with that. So it's kind of interesting where the boys find themselves. Sam's all about when they go in Providence and they're looking at art. Sam can talk art because he went to college. So, they find themselves, their strengths are greatly balanced, nicely balanced. But again, where they find themselves comfortable, and around the kind of people that they find themselves, it's kind of different in that sense.
Travis?
Yeah, I think that, when we look at like the in-group, out-group, in-groups exist because it helps us feel better. It helps us feel like we can build our self-esteem. We feel like we're, again, like that normal section of people. And that's why they exist. They really help in like psychologically in a lot of different ways. So I think that for the boys looking at it, um, they never had a shot to fit in, and the benefit of them together is that they can build each other up. You know, we really get to see this, I think, in season 15, when they're trapped. All hell is coming out of the rift that God opened up, or Chuck opened up, and they're like, you know, everybody, all the demons, all the monsters versus us. I'll take those odds. You know, they have that because they have the experience, because they have people looking up to them, and they are the in group of the out group. They're the people that, like, everybody knows who the Winchesters are. They have that reputation going for them, and I think that helps boost their um, sense of esteem and worth. You know, they're when Bobby's dying, you hear Dean like, "I'm the guy who does his job. Now you go do yours." They talk about how many times they've saved the world. You know, I mean, even Sully, the imaginary friend from Just My Imagination, talks about, you know, you saved the world, Sam. You've done good things. So they have these rewards because of the type of outgroup that they're in. You know, and it makes me think, we were talking about like bikers having their own, and truck drivers. You know, we also have the experience of these in-group members versus out-group members. In-group being the regular society, they don't have information on monsters. They're told they don't exist. And oftentimes when people are told, no, hey, this is real, very rarely are they just like, nope, nope, nope. I mean, Doug, right? He didn't want anything to do with it. But other people are like, okay, Claire becomes a hunter. Jody, Donna, they become hunters because of what's out there. So I think that those things are important to pay attention to. And then I look at like the men of letters and what they do, right? And that's in going back to like what I mentioned earlier, is like information based decision making. It's a group of people who collect, analyze, and interpret data. Again, Bobby, Garth, you know, the men of letters, the British men of letters, the bunker itself, and how it exists. So these things get added together, and then they like, no, this is the decision we have to do. This is what gives us meaning. This what gives us purpose. Helping other people, so other people don't have to experience what we did in losing Mary and eventually John. Right? We get to do selfless acts, put our lives online so other people don't have to. You know, Bobby, you see this when his wife turns, and he has to kill her, and then he becomes a hunter. The Winchesters, like I said, I mean, Batman does the same thing, right? He uses his experience to not want other people to get hurt, and that's why Dean is Batman.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, it reminded me of the fact that, yes, they had all of these things where the bunker, and they set up shop and all of these things. But at the very, very end, in episode 19, at the very, very end, when they feel this freedom where Chuck is gone and now they can make their own, they have real free will. It ends with the two of them in the Impala going down the road. And so it always comes back to that. And I think that's at their core. It always comes back to the two brothers in the car driving down the road. So even though they have, you know, the British men of letters brought in all these toys, and then they had an actual space to stay in that they could call their own with the bunker and all of that. But yeah, at the end, baby is still home. It's still, you know, me and you against the world. And ultimately that's, you know, they are the ultimate in of the out groups. You know, they're the in of the out groups themselves. So I think that's what it always comes back to.
You know, I had to laugh, Susan, when you mentioned about the normal family walking into Harple's Roadhouse. I go to Dragon Con a lot, which is this 90, you get to hang out with 90,000 of your other fandom friends in downtown Atlanta. And inevitably, it's the same weekend as a University of Georgia football game. And there is overlap in some of the hotels. So now you have two groups. One group knows it's a group. One group thinks it's just normal, but they're actually their own group running into each other. And I have seen parents wrap their arms around their children when the cosplayers go by like we're going to snatch them. And they don't think that in half an hour they're going to be in a stadium with a bunch of guys in fright wigs and body paint waving big foam hands, and that isn't cosplay too. But you've got two groups, and there are rules for being a sports fan, what you can do and what you can't. There are rules for being a convention goer and the kind of behavior that's expected. And then you go to the Ace of Fox episode where Sam and Dean kind of awkwardly wander into a hunter's funeral and find out that people do shots every time somebody mentions a Wendigo, or that people tell stories about how many times they've died. And they're just kind of flat-footed because they don't, this is supposed to be their territory, and it's not. But even within hunters, and how many laws they break, how countercultural they are, you know, as soon as Gordon's name comes up, Ellen's like, oh no, you don't want to be around that guy. He's bad news. And so there are hunters that are transgressive even by the standards of hunter community. And we get to see glimpses of that, which may explain another reason why John kept his boys away from it. Perhaps not after they were grown, but not necessarily where you'd want to take two little boys. So how big a circle do people need to be fairly comfortable psychologically? I know they've done, you know, they've said, well, historically villages were about 150 people, and that's kind of what we're wired for, more or less. Any thoughts on, you know, how big a circle do we need? Can it really be two people? What do you think, Susan?
Oh, well, I think it can be. I was really thinking that Travis was going to jump on this one because I think he has a lot to say about this. And, you know, yeah, it comes back to those two fundamental people, but that's for a show. I think in real life, it's going to be something a little bit different, right?
Yeah, there's a therapy or modality of therapy and understanding that they say a minimum of five people, and each of those people can have a different role in your life, right? So for Sam, you want to hunt? Let's go talk to Dean. You know, you want to talk emotions? Maybe we're going to talk to Jody, right? Or Donna or Mary when she does answer her cell phone, right? They have casts for certain things when it becomes like angelic, right? They go to different people for different things. And the same is true in real life. So a lot of people I relate to, and this goes back to the very beginning of our talk today, you know, only this small group can understand me. They can understand sometimes, right? Even in that small group. But we tell ourselves that they'll get me. But, you know, an air wing Marine, a grunt Marine, and a supply Marine are going to have different experiences. Yeah, they got foundation of the Marine Corps, but their deployments are much different. A hunter that does just vamps, right, or werewolves is going to have different experiences, right? The Baton Rouge vampire hunter or whatever his name was. So you have stuff like that. But they say five things. So I always tell people, I was like, listen, my sister is great with my dogs, and she doesn't get access to my bank account. I trust her with some things, but not all things, and that's okay. But if you have five people that you can rely on, and you know, one is banking stuff, one is dogs, one is hunting, one is military stuff, and one is just going to concerts with, you're going to be a little bit better, well-rounded. So yeah, that's kind of what I base it off, is like a minimum of five people, and those all those people have different roles in your life, and that's perfectly fine.
I can totally see that. I know who my five are.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Mandy is my supernatural, you know, buddy, and my writing partner, and you know, my person that we go to conferences with, and you know, for these kinds of things. And we went to Vegas Con years ago and had the absolute best time. So you know, and then I have other friends that we do other things, but I totally can see that, Travis, how that different people for different situations, different circumstances, and that makes total sense. That's going to be the way that is. I think, yeah, Sam and Dean try to be everything for each other, but I think that's why we see all the problems, why we see so much of the, like Sam eventually says, everything that has ever gone wrong is because we're family, because it keeps coming back to that. And so I think that that's an interesting thing to look at. Yeah, they did need more a greater circle than just the two of them.
Yeah, because sometimes
Well,
they're both struggling in different ways too, and then they don't have anybody to go to. Right? Who do they go to? Cass. He's going to interrogate the cat. He doesn't know what's going on for the first, half time he's on the show, until he gets, all the information of all pop culture and stuff. But there's a lot of stuff that he just doesn't understand with human nature. And, Dean connects to Benny, but then Benny is a vamp and he can only have so many things he can relate to. And Sam gets hurt when Dean trusts him more than he feels like he's trusting, when Dean trusts Benny more than he feels like he's trusting Sam. Because that codependency that you mentioned earlier, Susan, like that dynamic of the two of them being in their everything together, to where they don't even know how to communicate outside of the two of them sometimes.
well, yeah, because they have so much shared experience and so many shared secrets and so much psychological damage. It's not even like these are two quote unquote normal people who are just in a situation where, like, military siblings who have to stick together town after town after town, but otherwise life is pretty okay. Not so much with these guys all their lives, and then to have the pressure of trying to be there for each other, that is a lot. And we see it fray at the edges. You mentioned Cass, and Cass has his own issues about, there's sometimes we get the feeling that even though he doesn't always get along well with angels, understatement, he still misses being able to talk to other angels who understand angel things, and can talk about home. There's definitely a displacement and a loneliness in Cass where the boys are okay for humans, but I'd like to talk to somebody who actually remembers the pearly gates. And I missed that. I did see a translation of "Be Not Afraid" that translates as "It's okay, you can stop screaming now." And that just changes everything. I'm never going to hear the Christmas story quite the same way. Please stop screaming. But it sounds like a very
I that on a shirt.
It sounds like a very Gabriel thing to say, doesn't
it? Yeah, I think I want that on a t-shirt. That's great.
Well, folks, as always, we have blown through our time and it's been a lot of fun. But before we wrap up, please tell us where we can find you online. And if you have any new, recent, or upcoming projects, tell us about them. Susan?
Well, Death and Supernatural Critical Essays is still available. You can get it at Amazon or at McFarland Publishing, or anywhere that sells books. It's a wonderful book, if I do say so myself. And then we have Women in Supernatural Critical Essays. That is down the line a little bit, probably late this year, early next year, and that is just, we're so looking forward to seeing that in print. It's going to be a wonderful collection. And as always, Gail, thanks so much for including me. These are wonderful talks. You and Travis,
awesome.
So fun.
Well, thank you both for being here. It is a lot of fun. Travis, how about you?
The most recent project I contributed to was with Lynn Zabernis, who's been on these panels with us before, Soups Ain't Always Heroes, talking about the boys. And what's great about that is Jim Beaver and Jensen Ackles both have a section in that book, relating it back to Supernatural, because we got our Bobby and Dean. But yeah, and going to cons. So I go to a lot of cons and speak on popular culture with mental health, because I do think that this is a bridge that we can really utilize to not feel so alone, through parasocial relationships. So I'm always down to talk about these stuff.
And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. If you spell them right, you'll find me on one or both of those at all the social media. My two latest releases are Reckoning under the Gail Z Martin name and Last Resort under the Morgan Bryce name. And I do quite a number of in-person conventions every year, as well as going to be a fan at a couple of Supernatural cons and here on Continual. So thank you so much for being here. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There will be more Supernatural coming up on Continual. So we'll see you online.